The deficit this year was $61 billion.
That was last year's deficit.
Last year. And there's 40 million people in Canada. And so that's $1,500 per person federal overspending. And that's $6,000 essentially per family. So just for everybody watching and listening, your federal government spent $6,000 of your family's money last year going over their budget. That's just what they spent in excess of what they had originally budgeted. Right.
And that's on top of having among the highest taxes in the world, with our 53% highest marginal tax rate, plus carbon tax, plus high payroll taxes, plus high business taxes, plus high capital gains taxes. So they're taking in more money than ever before. They've squeezed the taxpayer out of every last dime, and they're still $62 billion short.
Right.
And that's just one level of government, by the way. Then
Right.
the provinces have deficits that compound the federal one. So we have way too much government, and we need to reduce the size and cost of government and unleash the power of the free market.
Okay, so it's also the case that we haven't gone into diagnostics yet, but it's also the case that the Trudeau administration has increased the federal bureaucracy 40%?
In bodies, yes.
In bodies, since its inception.
Yeah.
Right. But despite that, they've also radically increased the amount of money that they're spending on consultants.
Yes.
Who are about as expensive. They're as expensive as employees go.
Oh, they're way more expensive.
Yeah, as any employee you could ever possibly have, right? $600 an hour, something like that. Right. So they've massively increased the size of the federal bureaucracy, but also massively increased the degree to which they outsource the work that hypothetically the bureaucrats should be doing.
And this is not, it sounds like one of those sort of annoying things that bothers us all, but isn't very substantive. You think one guy is making $600 an hour. We're spending $21 billion on federal government consultants alone. That's $1,400 per Canadian family in federal taxes
per year,
just for consultants.
Right.
Per year. That's recurring. That's not a one-time cost. So it is an insane amount of money to be spending on that, especially when you have more bureaucrats to supposedly do the work. And arguably, they're delivering worse results than ever before. I mean, our border is more porous. Our military has been weakened. And our basic services.
Weakened or devastated?
Well, you could put it either way. I mean, I think it's definitely been weakened. And despite the heroism of the men and women who still serve, the political leadership has undermined it in every possible way.
Right. Immigration, porous border. I think our per capita immigration rate exceeds that of the U.S., even given the U.S. open southern border.
Oh, by far. We had a population growth of 1.2 million in 2023. That's on a base of 40 million people. So it's an astonishing number of people to bring in 1 year. Everyone now admits that this was a calamity for housing, the job market, and our healthcare system.
Well, Trudeau himself walked it back recently.
He walked it back.
With what was the approximation of a public apology.
Yes. This is after he called everyone who questioned his immigration policy a racist.
Right.
And then he adopted the policies that he was calling racist only a year and a half earlier. So.
Okay, so that's a lot of, I just talked to Terry Glavin, a Canadian journalist this week too, and he did about a 5-dimensional analysis of the trouble that Canada was in. It was blackly comic in some ways, because we realized at the end of the conversation, or near the end of it, that we hadn't even discussed the ever-present threat of the Quebec separatists. And I was thinking, oh my God, like Canada's in a pretty dismal state when the threat of Quebec separatism is number 6 on the list of threats to the integrity of the country.
Yes.
Right. So, okay. So now
that's making a comeback too. God.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, the PQ is now leading in the polls in Quebec after they had been completely obliterated in the Harper era. Separatism was completely dead in Quebec, and now it's making a resurgence. And ironically,
more out of desperation than anything else.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that the leader of the PQ has actually been making economic arguments in favor of separate. They used to always try to avoid that because most Quebecers would say, well, clearly we'd be worse off economically if we left. But because Trudeau has been and Freeland and the entire Liberal gang in Ottawa has been such a colossal disaster for our national economy, the separatists are now able to make the argument that they would be better off separating from that calamity. Now, I intend
that was the plan all along.
Maybe I intend to reverse that argument by making our economy strong again. But it really is astonishing to see how badly things have changed in every respect.
Okay, so this has really transpired in large part over the 9 to 10 year period that Trudeau has been governing. And so when you are trying to put your finger on what went so wrong, so calamitously wrong, what do you think the major contributors were? I mean, there's a lot of hydras whose heads we're encountering at the moment, and I imagine it's relatively difficult to trace a causal pathway, but what did we do wrong as a country?
Well, I mean, it doesn't. What I'm about to say is not a shock to anyone. We have a prime minister who is dedicated to a extremely radical ideology. It is just a rehashed socialism that has been discredited again and again and again throughout the ages. And his basically authoritarian socialism has guided him throughout his entire prime ministership. He believes in a state that controls every aspect of your life, your money, your speech, your thought. He controls the economic, all of the industries of the country. Every time that has been tried, it is a complete disaster. So there's no mystery involved. It is the same old disastrous outcome that results from the same old disastrous policies.
Right, that have demonstrated themselves as disastrous continuously throughout the 20th century.
Exactly.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is particularly striking, I saw Stephen Guilbeault, who's probably the minister in Trudeau's cabinet who's most fervently
he describes himself as a socialist.
Economy. Well, this is the thing. Yeah. So he described himself as a socialist. And so for all you international people listening, Canada has always had a socialist party, and that's the New Democratic Party, the NDP, which is currently run by Jagmeet Singh, who's propping up Trudeau, all his protestations to the contrary. And Canadians have always been, about 20% of Canadians have stably supported the socialists, the NDP in Canada. And that's been true since about 1962 or something, when they first popped up as a federal party. Now, the Liberals, and that's Trudeau's party, have been a centrist party, historically speaking, and they were the home of the classic Liberals, all things considered. And they like to steal good ideas from the left and from the right and chart Canada's course down the middle. The thing about Trudeau's Liberals is they're not Liberals, is they're far left socialists. And they came to power in the guise of Liberals, and that meant that their government was fraudulent, technically speaking, from the beginning. Because Guilbeault, for example, obviously should have been a member of the NDP and not the classic traditional Canadian Liberals. But he didn't care, because he knew that had he run for the Socialists, he would have ended up with 20% of the vote, because that's what they always do, and never had any clear pathway to power. Exactly. And so Trudeau brought a bunch of people in who were so radically left that they left the NDP in the dust, essentially. And they've been running the country on false pretenses for 9 years. And if you ally that with the fact that Trudeau is he clearly has narcissistic personality characteristics and runs the country, I think, as a testament to his own grandeur. It's something like that. And one of your caucus members recently stood up in the House and I think listed something approximating 60 scandals. I mean, I've been scandalized by that because my observation, I've been watching the Canadian political landscape for, 5 decades, and the Trudeau government has skated through at least a half a dozen scandals that under normal circumstances would have provoked an honorable government to resign. And then that doesn't count the other 54.
Yeah.
And so at the moment, Trudeau's grip on authority is very shaky. His deputy prime minister resigned last week in a cloud of catastrophic, surreal manipulation. He shuffled his cabinet this week. At least a third of his caucus doesn't have any confidence in him, but he's being propped up by the socialists, Jagmeet Singh in particular, who also continually proclaims publicly that he is an opponent of the Trudeau government and is standing up against him while refusing categorically to do the thing that's actually in his power to bring down the government. So I just can't understand this at all. So do you want to walk us through this?